when a racist cop tore up a black woman's passport at a border checkpoint. He thought he was asserting his authority. Little did he know, the woman standing before him wasn't just any traveler. She was a UN ambassador with global influence. What happened next left the officer frozen in shock. This isn't just a story about an abuse of power. It's a powerful lesson about respect, accountability, and the dangers of making snap judgments. The moment the truth was revealed, the entire situation turned upside down. Stay tuned to see how this jaw-dropping encounter unfolded. Let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories that challenge perspectives and ignite change. It was a bustling day at the international border checkpoint. Travelers from all over the world lined up to present their documents, eager to pass through customs and continue their journeys. Among them was Dr. Amara Johnson, a distinguished UN ambassador. In her early 40s, Amara carried herself with a calm confidence, wearing a tailored suit and carrying a small leather briefcase. She was returning home after a week-long conference where she had been addressing issues of global inequality. Amara had spent her career advocating for justice and fairness, values she held close to her heart. Despite her high-ranking position, she remained grounded and approachable. As she approached the counter to present her passport, she wasn't thinking about her title or status, just about getting home to her family. Behind the counter stood Officer Rick Harding, a middle-aged man with a stern expression. Harding had a reputation among his colleagues for being overly strict, often singling out travelers he deemed suspicious. To him, Amara was just another face in the crowd, someone he decided didn't belong. He noticed her dark complexion, her briefcase, and the diplomatic passport in her hand. Without bothering to examine it properly, Harding's assumptions took over. "Step aside," Harding barked, his tone sharp and dismissive. "I need to ask you a few questions." Amara raised an eyebrow but complied, stepping into the designated area for additional screening. "Of course, officer," she said politely. "But may I ask why I'm being stopped?" Harding crossed his arms, his demeanor dripping with condescension. "We have to be careful with documents like yours," he said, glancing briefly at her passport. "You know, we see a lot of fakes." Amara remained composed, though she felt a pang of frustration. "I assure you, my documents are authentic," she replied calmly. "I'm a UN ambassador. You can verify that easily." Harding ignored her words, flipping through her passport without care. "A UN ambassador, huh?" he scoffed. "Sure you are." His dismissive tone made it clear he didn't believe her. The travelers nearby began to notice the exchange, some whispering, while others glanced nervously at Harding's escalating attitude. The setting was tense. The bright lights of the checkpoint cast sharp shadows, highlighting the stark contrast between Amara's calm professionalism and Harding's overt hostility. The other officers at nearby counters occasionally glanced over but said nothing, hesitant to intervene. Harding abruptly closed the passport, a look of disdain on his face. "You people think you can flash some fancy title and avoid scrutiny," he sneered. Before Amara could respond, he tore the passport in half, the sound of ripping paper echoing through the checkpoint. A collective gasp rose from the travelers nearby. Amara's eyes widened slightly, but she quickly regained her composure. "Officer Harding," she said, her voice steady, "you've just made a serious mistake." Harding smirked, clearly believing he had the upper hand. "We'll see about that," he said, crossing his arms triumphantly. What happened next would leave him speechless. The checkpoint fell into an uneasy silence after Officer Harding tore up Amara's passport. The tension in the air was palpable, with travelers and staff alike frozen in disbelief. Amara stood still, her calm demeanor a sharp contrast to the chaos Harding had just unleashed. She took a deep breath, steadying herself before speaking. "Officer Harding," she began, her voice firm but measured, "do you realize what you've just done?" Harding smirked, still confident in his authority. "I'm doing my job," he said dismissively. "You can't just walk in here with fake credentials and expect us to roll out the red carpet." Amara tilted her head slightly, her gaze unwavering. "I told you who I am, and I offered you every opportunity to verify my credentials. Instead, you chose to destroy my passport without cause. That's a violation of international law." Harding's smirk faltered for a brief moment before he recovered. "Violation of international law," he scoffed. "Give me a break." By now, a small crowd had gathered, some travelers whispering among themselves, while others watched with growing unease. A few officers at nearby counters exchanged uncertain glances, clearly uncomfortable with the unfolding situation. One officer even stepped toward Harding as if to intervene, but he stopped short, unsure of what to do. Amara, ever composed, opened her briefcase and retrieved a sleek leather folder. She pulled out a series of documents, holding them up for Harding and the onlookers to see. "This is a certified letter of appointment from the United Nations," she said. "It identifies me as a UN ambassador, with full diplomatic immunity. By tearing up my passport, you've not only violated my rights, but you've also created an international incident." Harding blinked, his confidence beginning to waver. "I don't have time for your games," he said, though his voice lacked its earlier force. "Anyone can forge a letter." Amara didn't flinch. "Then call the UN," she said, her tone steady. "Contact the Diplomatic Affairs Office. Verify my identity right now." The surrounding travelers murmured, some pulling out their phones to record the confrontation. The weight of the situation began to sink in for Harding, but his stubbornness wouldn't let him back down. "I'll contact my supervisor," he said gruffly, turning away. "Stay right here." As Harding disappeared into the back office, the tension in the checkpoint lingered. Amara remained poised, adjusting her suit and addressing the travelers who were watching. "Thank you for your patience," she said, her voice calm and commanding. "I'm sorry you had to witness this, but I assure you the truth will come to light." A few people nodded in support, while others whispered words of encouragement. One woman stepped forward cautiously. "Are you really a UN ambassador?" she asked softly. "Yes, I am," Amara replied with a small smile. "And situations like this are exactly why I do the work I do, to challenge prejudice and hold people accountable." Meanwhile, in the back office, Harding was beginning to panic. His supervisor, a seasoned officer named Lieutenant Carter, had arrived, and it didn't take long for her to grasp the severity of the situation. "You tore up her passport?" Carter asked incredulously, her tone a mix of shock and anger. Harding stammered. "I thought it was fake." She was acting too confident, like she was above the law. Carter glared at him. "Did you even check her documents? Run her credentials? Call diplomatic affairs?" Harding remained silent, his face pale. Carter shook her head and picked up the phone, dialing the number listed on Amara's diplomatic letter. Within minutes, she had confirmation. Amara Johnson was indeed a UN ambassador, and her position carried significant international clout. Lieutenant Carter marched back to the checkpoint, her expression grim. Harding trailed behind her, his usual bravado replaced with nervous silence. When they reached Amara, Carter stepped forward and extended her hand. "Ambassador Johnson," she said respectfully, "I deeply apologize for what has happened here today. We've confirmed your credentials, and I assure you, this matter will be handled appropriately." Amara looked at Carter, her composure intact. "Thank you, Lieutenant," she said. "But an apology isn't enough. Officer Harding's actions were not only disrespectful but illegal. This situation requires accountability." Carter nodded, glancing at Harding, who stood awkwardly to the side. "You're absolutely right," she said. "Officer Harding will face disciplinary action and will work with your office to resolve this matter immediately." Amara crossed her arms, her gaze shifting to Harding. "I hope you understand the gravity of what you've done," she said. "You tore up my passport without cause, dismissed my identity, and created an international incident, all because of your assumptions." Harding opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. His earlier arrogance had vanished, leaving only regret and humiliation. The conflict at the checkpoint had reached its peak, but the resolution was far from over. What would happen next would send shockwaves through the entire department and beyond. As Lieutenant Carter continued apologizing on behalf of the department, the tension at the checkpoint shifted. Amara Johnson remained poised, her voice calm but firm as she addressed both the lieutenant and the gathered crowd. The small act of tearing her passport had escalated into something far greater, a blatant example of prejudice and abuse of power. "Lieutenant Carter," Amara began, her tone professional but unyielding, "an apology alone won't resolve this. Officer Harding's actions didn't just inconvenience me, they violated international laws and my rights as a diplomat. This behavior cannot be excused or swept under the rug." Carter nodded solemnly. "I understand, Ambassador Johnson," she replied. "I assure you, Officer Harding will be disciplined, and we will cooperate fully to repair the damage caused." Amara's gaze shifted to Harding, who stood stiffly to the side, his earlier arrogance replaced by visible discomfort. "Officer Harding," she said, addressing him directly, "your actions today reflect poorly on your role as a law enforcement officer. You assumed I didn't belong, dismissed my credentials, and acted out of bias instead of professionalism. Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Harding hesitated, his face reddening. He cleared his throat but avoided her eyes. I made a mistake," he stammered. "I shouldn't have torn up your passport. I'm sorry." The apology was weak and hollow, and Amara wasn't about to let it pass without making her point clear. "A mistake?" she said, her voice sharper now. "A mistake is misplacing paperwork or misspeaking. What you did was deliberate. You tore up my passport in an attempt to assert your authority over someone you assumed was powerless." The gathered travelers and officers murmured in agreement. Harding shifted uncomfortably, his confidence fully eroded. At that moment, Amara's phone buzzed in her briefcase. She calmly retrieved it, glancing at the screen before answering. It was a representative from the UN's Diplomatic Affairs Office. After a brief exchange, she handed the phone to Lieutenant Carter. "It's for you," she said. "They'd like to discuss the situation directly." Carter's face paled as she took the call, stepping aside to speak in hushed tones. Meanwhile, Amara turned back to the crowd. "What happened here today is not an isolated incident," she said. "It's part of a larger problem, assumptions based on race, position, and appearance. This isn't just about me. It's about challenging those biases at every level." The travelers watching began clapping softly, their admiration for Amara's strength and poise growing by the minute. Some even approached her to thank her for standing up to the injustice they had witnessed. As Carter finished her call, she returned to Amara with a more formal tone. "Ambassador Johnson," she said, "the Diplomatic Affairs Office has requested a full investigation into today's events. Officer Harding will be placed on immediate suspension and will expedite the process of issuing a replacement passport." At that moment, Amara reached into her briefcase and pulled out a sleek diplomatic badge that clearly displayed her title and authority. She held it up for everyone to see. "This badge represents the countless individuals I work to protect and empower every day. I carry it not for power, but to remind people like Officer Harding that prejudice has no place in our society." She handed the badge to Carter. "I hope you understand the severity of this incident and the impact it will have," she said. "This is a moment for reflection and accountability, not just for Harding, but for your entire department." Carter nodded, visibly shaken but respectful. "We'll ensure this is handled properly, Ambassador. I give you my word." As the confrontation came to an end, Harding was escorted out of the checkpoint by another officer. The travelers who had witnessed the entire ordeal applauded as Amara stood tall, her dignity intact despite the blatant disrespect she had endured. Before leaving the checkpoint, Amara addressed the gathered crowd one final time. "Moments like these remind us why it's so important to speak up and stand firm in the face of injustice. Change doesn't happen overnight, but it starts with accountability. Thank you all for bearing witness today." The applause grew louder as Amara walked away, escorted by a senior officer who treated her with the respect she deserved. The climactic confrontation had ended, but the ripples of the incident were only just beginning. What happened next would cement Amara's legacy as a leader and advocate for justice. The fallout from the incident at the checkpoint extended far beyond Officer Harding's immediate suspension. Within hours of Amara's departure, the story began circulating online, fueled by travelers who had witnessed the event and shared videos and posts on social media. The images of a passport being torn and the poised response of a UN ambassador quickly went viral, sparking widespread outrage and demands for accountability. News outlets picked up the story, highlighting not only the shocking actions of Officer Harding, but also the broader implications of such blatant prejudice. Headlines like "Racist Officer Tears Up Diplomat's Passport" and "UN Ambassador's Poise Shames Abusive Cop" dominated news cycles. The incident ignited a public conversation about systemic bias and the misuse of authority. The police department faced mounting pressure to address the situation transparently. Within 24 hours, the chief of police held a press conference stating, "We deeply regret the incident involving Ambassador Amara Johnson. Her treatment at our checkpoint was unacceptable and does not reflect the values of this department. Officer Harding has been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation, and we are cooperating with all relevant authorities to resolve this matter." The announcement did little to quell public anger, but it marked the beginning of significant internal reforms. Harding's actions became a symbol of the dangers of unchecked prejudice, and his name became synonymous with abuse of power. Meanwhile, Amara continued to handle the situation with grace and professionalism. She returned to her office at the UN, where she met with her legal and diplomatic teams to discuss the next steps. Despite the personal disrespect she had endured, Amara remained focused on the larger issue, ensuring that such incidents would not happen again. During a high-level meeting with the UN's Secretary General, Amara presented her case. "This is not just about me," she said. "It's about the countless individuals who are subjected to similar treatment every day, but lack the platform or resources to fight back. We must demand systemic accountability." The Secretary General agreed, issuing a formal complaint to the country's government and requesting a comprehensive review of its border policies. This elevated the incident from a local controversy to an international matter, forcing authorities to take swift and decisive action. For Officer Harding, the consequences of his actions were swift and severe. The internal investigation revealed a pattern of misconduct, with multiple complaints of discriminatory behavior lodged against him in the past. As these revelations came to light, Harding's credibility as an officer was irreparably damaged. Facing both public backlash and professional disgrace, Harding released a statement through his attorney. "I deeply regret my actions and the harm they caused. I failed to uphold the responsibilities of my position, and I am prepared to face the consequences of my mistakes." The apology, however, did little to repair his reputation. Harding's suspension quickly turned into termination, and he became a cautionary tale of what happens when authority is misused. Rather than dwelling on the injustice she faced, Amara channeled her energy into advocacy. She began a campaign to raise awareness about the rights of travelers and the importance of holding law enforcement accountable for their actions. Her speeches and interviews resonated with millions, sparking a global conversation about prejudice and power dynamics. During one televised interview, Amara said, "What happened to me was egregious, but it's not unique. It's a symptom of a deeper problem, a system that allows bias to dictate behavior. We must work together to dismantle these biases and ensure that respect and fairness are extended to everyone, regardless of their background." Her words struck a chord with audiences worldwide, further solidifying her status as a leader and advocate for justice. The incident also led to policy changes within the country's border security agency. New protocols were introduced, requiring additional training for officers on cultural sensitivity, bias recognition, and the handling of diplomatic credentials. The agency publicly acknowledged its shortcomings and pledged to do better. Amara's case became a landmark example of how courage and composure in the face of injustice could inspire systemic change. It wasn't just about one officer or one incident. It was about addressing the broader issues of power, privilege, and prejudice that permeated institutions. As the public conversation continued, Amara's story remained a powerful reminder of the strength it takes to stand up against wrongdoing and the profound impact one person's actions can have on the world. The weeks following the incident at the checkpoint marked a turning point for the institutions and individuals involved. For Ambassador Amara Johnson, her dignity and calm response to injustice inspired millions, while for the system that allowed such behavior, the confrontation became a wake-up call for reform. The Border Security Agency, facing both public outcry and international scrutiny, announced sweeping reforms aimed at preventing future incidents of bias and abuse. These changes included mandatory training programs. All officers were required to undergo comprehensive bias training, focusing on recognizing and eliminating prejudiced behaviors. Cultural sensitivity modules were added to ensure officers could interact respectfully with travelers from diverse backgrounds. Accountability measures. A new system was implemented to allow travelers to report misconduct directly, with complaints reviewed by an independent oversight committee. Protocol for diplomatic credentials. Officers were educated on handling diplomatic documents and respecting international protocols, ensuring that incidents like the one involving Amara would never happen again. These reforms were lauded by human rights organizations, though many emphasized the need for continued vigilance to ensure their effective implementation. Amara's poise and grace during the ordeal earned her widespread respect and admiration. Community members, activists, and colleagues reached out to express their support and solidarity. Many viewed her as a role model, not just for her high-ranking position, but for her ability to turn a deeply unjust situation into an opportunity for change. During a public event held to honor her courage, Amara addressed the crowd. This experience, as painful as it was, reminded me of the power of resilience, she said. But this isn't just about me. It's about the countless people who face similar injustices every day. My hope is that this incident inspires us all to challenge bias and build systems rooted in fairness and respect. Her words drew a standing ovation, with many attendees vowing to carry her message forward in their own communities. For Officer Rick Harding, the consequences of his actions were severe. His termination from the Border Security Agency marked the end of a career built on unchecked authority and bias. In addition to losing his job, Harding became a central figure in public discussions about accountability, serving as an example of what happens when power is misused. In a final attempt to repair his image, Harding released a more detailed apology. "I failed to treat Ambassador Johnson with the respect she deserved, and for that I am deeply sorry. I've reflected on my actions and understand the harm they caused, not just to her, but to the integrity of the system I served." While some accepted Harding's apology as a step toward accountability, many remained skeptical, viewing his statement as too little, too late. The incident strengthened Amara's resolve to fight for justice and equality on a larger scale. She launched an international campaign focused on combating systemic bias and empowering individuals to know and assert their rights. Partnering with global organizations, she organized workshops, forums, and public discussions aimed at dismantling prejudice in institutions around the world. During one of her speeches at a United Nations summit, Amara said, "The systems we rely on must serve all people equally. When prejudice is allowed to persist, it erodes trust, fairness, and the very foundation of justice. We have the power to change this, but it requires courage, accountability, and collective effort." Her words inspired delegates from multiple countries to implement similar reforms within their own borders, extending the ripple effect of her advocacy far beyond the initial incident. Amara's case also inspired individuals around the world to speak out against injustices they had faced. Social media campaigns like #StandWithAmara gained traction, with people sharing their own experiences and calling for systemic accountability. These stories highlighted the pervasive nature of bias and the urgent need for change. For many, Amara's resilience became a symbol of hope. Her story showed me that staying calm and standing firm can make a difference. One supporter wrote online, "She reminded us that dignity is our greatest strength, even in the face of injustice." Despite the widespread impact of the incident, Amara remained grounded. In a quiet moment at her office, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She thought about the moment Harding had torn up her passport and the disbelief she had felt. Yet, instead of letting anger consume her, she had chosen to channel that energy into something greater. "It's never easy," she said to a close colleague. "But if we don't stand up for ourselves and others, nothing will ever change. That's why I chose this path." Her colleague nodded, adding, "You didn't just stand up for yourself. You stood up for everyone who's ever been silenced or dismissed." That's powerful. Amara's story became a symbol of the fight against injustice, reminding people everywhere that change is possible, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Her calm, strategic response to adversity demonstrated that dignity and truth can triumph over prejudice and abuse of power. For those who witnessed or heard about her story, the message was clear. No one is powerless in the face of injustice. Amara's courage proved that even one voice can ignite a movement, transforming pain into progress and inspiring others to do the same. The story of Ambassador Amara Johnson teaches us a powerful lesson. Resilience and truth can triumph over prejudice and abuse of power. When faced with injustice, Amara didn't just defend her own dignity. She turned the moment into an opportunity for change. Her courage not only held Officer Harding accountable, but also sparked reforms that extended far beyond one border checkpoint. This story reminds us that silence in the face of wrongdoing is never the answer. Whether it's standing up for ourselves or for others, every act of courage helps pave the way for a more just and equitable society. Change may be slow, but it starts with people like Amara who refuse to back down. What would you do in a situation like this? Have you ever witnessed or experienced injustice? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful tales of resilience and justice. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time with another story that will challenge perspectives and ignite change. Until then, remember, standing up for what's right can change the world.